One bed, one rule, don't sleep in close, no falling in love. Alien girl. On a distant planet, a human diplomat arrived as part of a mission to build better relations between humans and the alien species of this faraway world. His assignment was clear: work closely with the alien council, learn their culture, and establish a lasting peace. Little did he know that the most challenging part of his assignment wouldn't be diplomatic talks or negotiating trade deals, but the unexpected living arrangement that awaited him. He had arrived at the place where he was meant to stay, a large sterile building that housed diplomats and visitors from various corners of the galaxy. As he entered his room, he noticed the odd design: a simple, single bed in the center of the space with two chairs across from each other. There were no other furnishings, no comforting touches of home. Just this single bed, the room, and an alien presence that was supposed to be his roommate. The door slid open, and she entered without a word. She was unlike any human he had ever met. Her features were sleek and elegant, her body language stiff yet graceful. Her alien species was known for their calm demeanor and sharp intellect, but he couldn't help feeling a bit uneasy. She was beautiful in a way he couldn't fully understand. Her eyes seemed to carry a depth of emotion, though her face remained mostly expressionless. She was tall, with an ethereal grace, and even though they had been told to follow strict professional conduct, there was an undeniable pull between them. When she spoke, her voice was cool and measured. "I hope you understand the rules," she said softly. "We will share the space, but there is one rule you must follow." She paused for a moment, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. "You must not sleep too close to me, and you must not fall in love with me." His confusion must have shown on his face because she quickly clarified, "It's a precaution. We must maintain our professionalism. You are here to work, not to develop personal attachments." She turned away, her tone leaving little room for disagreement. This is the way things must be. The human nodded, though he couldn't shake the unease creeping in. He hadn't been prepared for such a rule, especially not in the living quarters. He had expected to be alone, perhaps in a private room, but now, sharing a bed with an alien, a stranger from another world, with such a strange rule, it was an odd feeling. It wasn't that he didn't understand the purpose of the rule. He knew the importance of maintaining professional boundaries, but something about the way she said it made it seem like this was more than just a simple precaution. There was something beneath the surface, something he didn't quite understand. The first night passed in an uncomfortable silence. They each lay on their own side of the bed, carefully keeping the designated distance between them. The human tried to sleep, but his mind raced. How could he possibly stay distant? She was so intriguing, so different, and yet there was an undeniable connection between them. Every time she shifted in the bed, every quiet sigh, every glance she gave him, there was a tension that made it impossible to ignore. But no matter how much he felt drawn to her, he remembered the rule: don't sleep too close, don't fall in love. It wasn't just a request, it was a command. Days passed, and the situation didn't get any easier. They worked together in silence, their professional duties taking precedence. There was little conversation between them, aside from the occasional exchange about their duties or the schedule for the day. But the human couldn't help but notice small details: the way her eyes would linger on the horizon when she thought no one was watching, or the soft tone of her voice when she spoke about her home planet. It was clear she was just as trapped in this arrangement as he was, though she showed it in a way that made her seem so composed, so in control. One evening, as they sat together in the room after a long day of meetings, the human found himself lost in thought, studying her from across the room. She was standing by the window, looking out at the city below. The moonlight reflected off the glass, casting a soft glow on her features. For a moment, she seemed so far away, like she belonged to a different world entirely. "Why do you follow these rules?" he asked without thinking, his voice almost a whisper. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "It is necessary for both of us to maintain our roles. If we let emotions interfere, it will cloud our judgment. And that is something we cannot afford, especially now. Peace is fragile. But is it always this way for you? Always so distant? She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly as if she was considering how to answer. Yes, my people value discipline above all else. We cannot afford to allow distractions, even ones that may seem natural. The human nodded, though the words didn't fully settle in his mind. He could understand the need for discipline, but he couldn't help but feel that something was missing. Life wasn't just about rules and order, it was also about connection, wasn't it? He couldn't deny the strange pull he felt toward her. As the days wore on, their silent understanding grew. They learned to share the bed without speaking of it, each respecting the boundaries that had been set, but neither of them truly happy with the arrangement. The tension was palpable. They would speak only when necessary, but it became harder and harder to avoid the quiet moments when their eyes would meet, when their breaths would sync, and when, for a split second, they would forget about the rules. One night, after a particularly exhausting day, the human awoke to find her sitting on the edge of the bed. Her shoulders were tense, and her eyes were focused on something far away, though he knew she wasn't really seeing anything. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft, careful not to break the fragile silence that had existed between them. She didn't respond right away, and for a moment he wondered if she would even acknowledge him. Finally, she turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting his. "I have never understood humans. Your emotions are overwhelming, and yet they are the very thing that can make you powerful." The human shifted in the bed, sitting up slightly. He wanted to ask more, but there was something in her voice, something that made him hesitate. "And you? Do you ever feel anything?" Her expression softened for just a moment, before she quickly masked it again. "I do, but it's forbidden. For me, for my people, it's a weakness." The human let out a breath, trying to process her words. The idea that emotions could be seen as a weakness seemed so foreign to him. He had always believed that it was through emotion that humans truly connected, that love, pain, and joy made them who they were. "Maybe," he said softly, "it's not a weakness. Maybe it's what makes you more real, more human." She turned away quickly, her back stiff, but the human could see the way her fingers curled slightly at her sides. She didn't speak again, and the tension between them grew even heavier. Yet something inside him shifted. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it was becoming clear that something more was happening between them. He knew they couldn't keep living like this. But the question was, could they break the rules? Or were they doomed to stay apart, never allowing themselves the chance to truly understand one another? The human lay back down, unable to sleep. He couldn't get the thoughts of her out of his mind. The boundaries were clear, but were they worth respecting? He wasn't so sure anymore. And as the moonlight bathed the room in soft light, he felt the weight of the rooms pressing down on him more than ever. Tomorrow he would have to face the rules again. But tonight, as he lay there in the quiet of the room, he allowed himself to wonder, what if there was more to this than just rules? What if, deep down, they both knew it? The days seemed to stretch on endlessly as the human and the alien girl continued their strange arrangement. They lived under the same roof, shared the same bed, and yet remained distant from each other. The rule was clear: do not sleep close, and do not fall in love. It was a rule they both tried to follow, but the tension between them was undeniable. The more time they spent together, the harder it became to ignore the pull between them. They worked together during the day, sharing tasks and responsibilities. The alien girl was efficient and precise, always focused on her duties. She spoke little, keeping a calm, measured tone that revealed nothing of what was going on inside her. The human, on the other hand, found himself becoming more and more curious about her. Her stoic exterior made it impossible to read her emotions. and it only deepened his fascination with her. In the evenings, after their work was done, they would return to the room and settle into the routine. The room was quiet, save for the occasional sound of shifting blankets or the distant hum of the city outside. The bed, despite being large enough for both of them, felt cramped with the rules hanging in the air. Every night, they each lay on opposite sides, careful not to cross that invisible line in the middle of the bed. They had agreed to the rule, but neither of them was truly happy with it. One night, after a particularly long day, the human lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced with thoughts of her. He couldn't help it. Every time he looked at her, he saw something different, a mix of strength and vulnerability, a quiet sadness behind those unreadable eyes. She was so different from anyone he had ever met. Her calm, controlled demeanor was both fascinating and frustrating. He longed to know what she was really thinking, to understand the things she kept hidden. As if sensing his restlessness, the alien girl shifted in the bed. She had been lying still for hours, but now she sat up, the soft rustle of her clothes breaking the silence. The human turned his head to look at her, his heart skipping a beat. She was looking out the window, her posture stiff but graceful. For a moment, she seemed lost in thought, completely unaware of his gaze. Unable to resist, the human spoke quietly. "Why do you keep so much inside? I can't help but wonder what you're thinking." Her head turned slightly, but she didn't face him directly. Instead, she looked out the window again. "It is how we are taught," she replied, her voice calm, but there was an edge to it. "Emotions only complicate things. They can make you weak. I have learned to control them." The human frowned. "I don't believe emotions make you weak. I think they make you stronger. They connect you to others, give you something real to hold on to." She didn't answer right away. The silence between them stretched out, and for a moment, he thought she wouldn't respond. But then, softly, she spoke again. "You don't understand. Where I come from, emotions are seen as distractions. They get in the way of our duties. We are taught to suppress them, to remain focused, to remain calm." She paused, her voice almost a whisper. "It is the only way we can survive." The human listened carefully, his heart aching for her. He could hear the pain in her words, the burden she carried. "But doesn't it get lonely to live without feeling anything?" She glanced at him, her eyes briefly meeting his before looking away. "Loneliness is a luxury we cannot afford," she said, her tone almost robotic, as if she had repeated those words 1,000 times. "We live for the mission, for our people. That is all that matters." The human felt a pang of sadness. She was so caught up in her duty, in the rules she had been taught, that she couldn't even allow herself the freedom to feel. It was as if she was trapped inside herself, unable to escape the walls she had built around her heart. He wanted to reach out, to tell her that she didn't have to live like that, but he knew the rules. He knew that breaking them would only lead to more pain. He shifted in the bed, his movements slow and careful, not wanting to disturb her. "I wish it didn't have to be this way," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wish we could just be normal, like people." She turned to face him then, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to gauge his sincerity. For a moment neither of them spoke. The air between them felt heavy, thick with unspoken words and emotions neither of them were willing to admit. But despite the distance, despite the rules, there was something real between them. It was a connection that neither of them could ignore, no matter how hard they tried. The human broke the silence. Maybe we don't have to follow all the rules. Maybe we can find a way to be closer, without breaking everything." Her eyes softened for a brief moment, but she quickly masked it, her expression returning to its usual stoic state. "We cannot," she said firmly, her voice betraying none of the hesitation he had seen just moments before. "The rules are there for a reason. If we allow ourselves to fall for each other, it will only make everything more difficult. We cannot afford that." He wanted to argue, to tell her that maybe it was worth the risk, but he knew it wouldn't do any good. The alien girl was too entrenched in her beliefs, too focused on her duty. She had been taught that emotions were a weakness, and no amount of convincing would change that overnight. "Maybe you're right," he said quietly, lying back on the bed, his eyes staring at the ceiling once more. "But I can't help but wonder, what would happen if we just let ourselves feel?" She didn't answer. Instead, she sat there, gazing out the window once more, lost in thought. The human knew that this was a question she couldn't answer yet, a question that would take time to unfold. The rest of the night passed in silence. Neither of them spoke again, but the air was charged with the weight of everything left unsaid. The rules still hung between them, as solid and unyielding as ever, but the connection, the bond they shared, was impossible to ignore. In the days that followed, the tension between them grew. They continued their work, each staying in their own world, carefully maintaining the distance that had been set. But despite their best efforts, the line between them began to blur. Every glance, every moment of closeness, only made it harder to resist the feelings that were starting to surface. The human couldn't stop thinking about her, about the quiet sadness in her eyes, the way she seemed to carry the weight of the universe on her shoulders. He wanted to help her, to show her that there was more to life than duty and rules, but he also knew that he couldn't force her to change. She had to come to that decision on her own. And so they continued their strange dance, living in the same space, sharing the same bed, but remaining apart. The rules still held them captive, but the question remained: could they break free from the chains of their emotions, or would they remain locked in this silent, impossible situation forever? As the days passed, the human couldn't help but feel that the answer lay somewhere between the unspoken words, between the glances they shared in the quiet of the night. But whether they would ever find the courage to act on it, to take the risk and break the rules, was something neither of them could yet answer. Days continued to pass by, and the human and the alien girl shared a space that was filled with both distance and an undeniable pull. It had become a routine now, waking up, working together, returning to the room at night, lying on opposite sides of the bed, careful not to breach the unspoken rule. But the tension between them never faded. In fact, it grew stronger with each passing day. The human had always thought that following the rules was the easiest path to take. He had always believed that keeping things professional was the way to maintain peace and harmony. But now, after spending so much time with her, he found himself questioning everything he once believed. How could they continue to live in this constant state of distance when there was clearly something deeper between them? He had learned more about her over the past few days than he ever expected to. She was disciplined, focused, and incredibly intelligent. Her people were known for their stoic nature, their ability to detach from emotions in order to serve their greater purpose. The alien girl had explained her culture to him in small, quiet moments. Her people were raised to suppress their feelings, to keep them in check, because emotions could cloud judgment and hinder their mission. To her, love, affection, or any form of emotional attachment was nothing more than a distraction. The human had tried to understand, but he couldn't completely agree. How could something as fundamental as love be considered a weakness? To him, love was what made life worth living. It was what connected people, what gave meaning to the smallest moments. But the alien girl was different. She had been taught to avoid those very things. That night, after a long day of meetings, they sat in the room, their silence louder than anything they could have said. The air felt thick with unspoken words. The human couldn't stand it anymore. His curiosity, his longing, had built up to a point where he couldn't ignore it any longer. "You've been so distant," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I can see it in your eyes, even when you try to hide it. There's something inside you, something you're holding back." "I want to know what it is. I want to understand you." The alien girl's gaze flickered toward him, but she didn't answer right away. She sat there, her body stiff, her eyes focused on the distant city lights outside the window. The moon cast a soft glow across the room, and for a moment, the human thought she wouldn't speak at all. But then she did. "I have learned to control it," she said softly, almost to herself. "Oh, everything inside me. Every feeling, every thought, I push it down. I don't let it show. It's how I survive." The human was silent for a moment, trying to process what she had said. "But..." He could feel her struggle, the weight of the emotions she was holding back. He didn't know what it was like to live that way, to suppress everything that made him human. He couldn't imagine living in a world where love, joy, or even sadness were forbidden. "I can't live like that," he said quietly. "I can't pretend that everything's fine when it's not. I can't pretend that I don't feel something for you." Her head snapped toward him at those words, her eyes wide, though she quickly masked her surprise with the same calm expression she always wore. The human could see it in her eyes, though, the flicker of something more, something deeper. "You feel something?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of disbelief.
"You're not supposed to. You know that, right?"
"You're here to do your duty, to complete your mission. There is no room for feelings, no room for distraction." "I know," the human said, his voice a little stronger now. "But that's the problem. You've made it so that nothing can ever feel real. We're both trapped in this space, following a rule that we don't even agree with. And I can't help but wonder, what if we just let ourselves feel?" She was silent for a long time, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to understand what he meant. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the way she fought against the words she wanted to say, the emotions she wanted to feel.
"I have to follow the rules," she finally said, her voice quieter now.
"It's all I know. It's what I've been taught since I was a child. Emotions are dangerous. They make us weak. They can destroy everything." The human shook his head, unable to accept her reasoning. "Maybe emotions aren't the enemy. Maybe it's the way we control them that's the problem. I don't want to live like this, never feeling anything, never allowing myself to be human. I don't want to live in a world where love is considered a weakness." He could see her struggling with his words, her body tense as if she were fighting against something inside her. The silence between them stretched on, and for a moment the human thought she might leave, that she might walk away, and shut him out for good. But then, something changed. A flicker of vulnerability crossed her face, and for the briefest moment, she let her guard down. It was almost imperceptible, but it was enough. She was beginning to question everything she had believed in. "I don't know how to be like you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to let myself feel. I've spent my whole life learning to shut everything out, but when I look at you, I don't know what to do. I feel something that I can't explain." The human felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She was starting to open up, to see that there was another way to live, another way to be. And even if she didn't fully understand it yet, he was hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, they could break free from the rules that bound them. "I don't want to be alone in this," the human said, his voice steady now. "I don't want to be trapped in this space between us. I don't want to follow these rules anymore. I want to be close to you, not just in this room, but in every way." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time he saw something in her eyes. A spark, a flicker of hope. It was small, but it was there. She didn't say anything at first, but he could see that she was beginning to understand. The walls she had built around herself, the rules she had followed so strictly, were starting to crumble. The human reached out, slowly, cautiously, and touched her hand. She didn't pull away. In fact, She seemed to hesitate for a moment before her fingers lightly brushed against his. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like the most natural thing in the world. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The room was quiet, but the air between them was charged with something new. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something real, something they had both been afraid to feel, and for the first time, they allowed themselves to feel it. They lay there, side by side, neither of them saying a word, but there was no longer any distance between them. The walls had come down and the connection between them had been made. It wasn't easy. It wasn't perfect, but in that moment, the human realized something. Sometimes breaking the rules wasn't the worst thing you could do. Sometimes it was the only way to truly live. And as the night stretched on, the human and the alien girl lay together, not just sharing a bed, but sharing something deeper. The journey ahead of them was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, they were both ready to face it, together. The days following that quiet night were filled with a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. For the first time, the human felt a sense of hope. The walls that had once seemed so insurmountable between him and the alien girl were beginning to crack. But with that hope came a deeper question. Could they really break free from the rules that had been placed upon them? Could they trust themselves to explore the connection that had begun to form between them? Their days continued to be filled with meetings, tasks, and the necessary work of their mission. They worked in silence, but now there was something different in the air. A quiet understanding. The human found himself more aware of her every move, every glance. She too seemed to be more aware of him, her eyes lingering just a moment longer than they ever had before. Yet, they both stayed careful. They both knew that they were still walking a fine line, and the weight of the rules still hung heavily in the air. One evening, after a particularly long day, they returned to the room. The silence between them felt thicker now, almost suffocating. The human knew they couldn't continue like this, forever pretending that nothing had changed. The rule had always been there, a barrier between them. But he couldn't shake the feeling that they had crossed a line already, one that was impossible to undo. Their connection had deepened in ways they hadn't anticipated, and now neither of them could ignore it. He glanced at the alien girl who had already taken her usual place by the window. The moonlight bathed her in a soft glow, highlighting the contours of her face. She was lost in thought, her gaze distant, as if her mind was somewhere far away. The human stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. The words felt heavy in his throat. It wasn't just the rules that had kept them apart. It was fear. Fear of what would happen if they gave in to the feelings that had begun to grow between them. Finally, he spoke. His voice was steady, but there was an urgency to it. I don't want to keep pretending anymore. I can't keep doing this, acting like everything is fine when it's not. The alien girl didn't turn to look at him right away. She seemed to be weighing his words, as if she was trying to decide whether to respond at all. After a long pause, she finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. You know what the consequences would be if we give in to this, whatever it is between us? Her words were measured, but there was an underlying tremor in her voice, something he hadn't heard before. We can't afford to be distracted, not with everything at stake. The human walked over to her, standing just a few feet away. He didn't touch her, but his presence felt like a pull, like gravity drawing them closer despite the distance between them. I know, he said quietly. I know the risks. But I also know that this connection we have, it's real. And if we keep pretending that it's not, it'll tear us apart. She finally looked at him then, her eyes locking with his. For the first time in days, there was a crack in her stoic expression. She didn't speak, but the look in her eyes said more than words ever could. It was a mix of fear, uncertainty, and something else. Something deeper, more vulnerable. I've spent my whole life keeping control, she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been taught to suppress everything, to avoid attachment. But with you, she trailed off, her gaze shifting to the floor as if the words were too difficult to say. The human took a step closer, his heart beating faster in his chest. With me, what? She looked back up at him, her expression raw, unguarded. With you, I feel like I'm starting to lose that control, and it scares me. Her admission hung in the air between them, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The tension was palpable, a fragile thread that could snap at any moment. But the human could feel it, deep down. This wasn't something they could walk away from. He didn't want to walk away from it. Not anymore. He took another step forward, and this time, the alien girl didn't pull back. She didn't move away. Instead, she stayed still, watching him with wide eyes, as if waiting for him to make the next move. Maybe it's time we stop fighting it, the human said, his voice gentle but firm. Maybe it's time we let ourselves feel, even if it means breaking the rules. Maybe we don't have to live in fear of what might happen. Maybe we can make our own rules. She was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. The human could see the conflict playing out behind her eyes. She wanted to give in. He could see it in the way her shoulders had relaxed, in the way her eyes softened when she looked at him. But fear still held her back. Fear of the unknown. Fear of the consequences. I don't know how to do this, she whispered finally, her voice almost breaking. I don't know how to let go of everything I've been taught. The human reached out, gently touching her arm. He didn't pull her closer, didn't force anything. It was just a touch, a simple gesture of reassurance. You don't have to know everything, he said softly. You just have to take it one step at a time. We don't have to have all the answers right now. But we can start by letting go of the fear. Let's start by being real with each other. For a long time, she didn't respond. The silence was thick, heavy, but this time it felt different. It wasn't the silence of distance or avoidance. It was the silence of two people standing at the edge of something new, something uncertain, but something that felt worth taking a chance on. Finally, she nodded, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was enough for the human to feel that there was hope. There was a chance for them to break free, to create their own path, even if it meant defying everything they had been taught. And so they stood there together, the space between them now filled with something new, something tentative, but real. The fear didn't go away. The rules didn't just disappear. But in that moment, the human realized that they didn't need to have it all figured out. They didn't need to follow every rule to the letter. They just needed to take the first step. Together. I'm not asking you to forget everything, the human said quietly. I'm just asking you to trust me and to trust yourself. She looked at him then, her gaze steady and clear. And for the first time, the human saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. Something like hope. Fragile but shining through. Okay, she said, her voice a little steadier now.
I'll trust you, but only if we can do this together.
The human smiled, a sense of relief flooding through him. Together? He repeated. Always. In that moment, they both understood. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges and uncertainties. But they were no longer afraid to take that first step. Together they could face whatever came next. The rules had held them back for so long, but now they had something stronger to hold on to. Each other. And that was a rule they could live by. The days after their conversation were filled with a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. They had taken the first step, and though the road ahead was still unclear, it felt different now. The weight of the unspoken rules that had once governed their lives together seemed lighter, as if, for the first time, they were no longer bound by them. The connection between them had shifted, grown, and now neither of them could ignore it. They continued their work. But things had changed. The human noticed it in the way they interacted, the way their conversations felt more natural, more open. They spoke to each other not just as colleagues or strangers sharing a room, but as two people who were starting to understand each other in ways they hadn't before. The alien girl, too, seemed more relaxed. Her stoic demeanor wasn't gone, but there was a softness to her now, a vulnerability she hadn't shown before. And for the first time, the human could see the conflict in her eyes, the battle between the rules she had followed her whole life and the feelings she was beginning to accept. One afternoon, as they sat together after a long meeting, the human found himself watching her more than usual. She was sitting across from him, quietly reviewing some documents, her focus intense. There was something about the way she moved, the way she seemed so absorbed in her work, that made him admire her even more. He had always known she was intelligent and strong, but now he saw something deeper, an inner strength that came from a lifetime of control and discipline. He couldn't help but feel a sense of awe for her, but also a deep sadness. She had spent so much of her life suppressing her emotions, pushing them down to stay focused on her mission, on her duty. He couldn't imagine what that must have been like, to live in a world where emotions were seen as a weakness, something to be avoided at all costs. But now he realized that she was starting to question that belief. She was starting to see that there was more to life than duty and control. The human cleared his throat, breaking the silence between them. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice soft but sincere. "I mean, about everything, about us." She looked up from her papers, her eyes meeting his for a moment before she quickly looked away. There was a hesitation in her gaze, as if she wasn't sure how to answer. For a moment the room was filled with the weight of her silence. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "I don't know," she said, her words slow and careful. "I'm not sure how to feel about all of this. Everything is so different now. I've spent my whole life trying to stay focused, to stay in control. But when I look at you, I don't know how to keep pretending that nothing has changed." The human nodded, understanding the struggle she was going through. He had seen the shift in her, the way she was beginning to let her guard down. It wasn't easy for her, but he could see the change happening, even if it was small. "I know it's not easy," he said softly, "but I think you're starting to realize that it's okay to feel. You don't have to hide from it anymore." She was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant as if she was lost in her thoughts. Then she looked at him again, her gaze softer now. "I don't know if I can ever fully let go of everything I've been taught," she admitted. "But maybe you're right. Maybe I don't have to be afraid of what I feel." The human smiled, his heart swelling with a mixture of hope and relief. "You don't have to be afraid," he said gently. "You're not alone in this. We can figure it out together." For the first time, the alien girl smiled, truly smiled, a small but genuine expression that made the human's heart race. It wasn't the controlled, measured smile she had always worn before. It was different. It was real. Later that evening, as they sat in their room, the human couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. It hadn't been easy, and there were still many challenges ahead, but they had taken the first step, and that was enough. They had broken the barriers that had once kept them apart, and they were learning to trust each other, to understand each other. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was something they could hold on to. As the days passed, the bond between them only grew stronger. They continued to navigate their mission, their duties, but now there was a deeper sense of connection. They didn't have all the answers, and there were still moments of doubt and uncertainty. But they faced it together, knowing that no matter what happened, they would be able to handle it. The rules that had once governed their lives no longer had the same power over them. They were no longer afraid to feel, to experience the emotions that made them who they were. One night as they lay side by side on the bed, the human turned to look at her. She was staring at the ceiling, her face relaxed, her eyes unfocused. There was a peacefulness about her now, something he hadn't seen before. The tension that had once been so evident in her had started to fade, replaced by a quiet calm that he couldn't help but admire. "Do you think it was worth it?" he asked quietly, his voice almost a whisper. She turned her head to look at him, her eyes soft. "What do you mean?" "All of it," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "The risk, the breaking of the rules. Do you think it was worth it to let ourselves feel?" She was silent for a moment, her gaze searching his face as if weighing the question. Finally she spoke, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, it was worth it. I don't know where it will lead or what will happen next, but I know that I don't regret it. I don't regret feeling this with you." The human smiled, his heart swelling with warmth.
"I don't regret it either. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was no doubt, no fear."
There was only the simple truth that they had found something real, something worth holding on to. It wasn't perfect, and it would never be easy, but it was theirs. And that was enough. As the night stretched on, they lay there together, side by side. The space between them now filled with a sense of peace, of understanding. The rules they had once followed so strictly no longer had the same hold on them. They were free to be themselves, to feel what they felt, and to face whatever came next together. And for the first time, the human felt a deep sense of hope. The future was uncertain, but they were ready for it. Together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that the connection they had shared was something that could never be broken.